We're trying to hold the upper deck. We are trying to hold the upper deck now. We need to hold the doors of the Capitol. I need court support. We lost the line. We lost the line. All MPD, step back. All MPD, step back up to the upper deck.
Welcome to Polishing Turds with Nick and Cal. My name is Nick.
And I am a simulation.
And this is the simulation where we take a deep dive into the wonderful world of domestic terrorism.
Yeah, still no music. Fuck you.
Some music. But first, we have to talk about the entire evolution of the American radical right and the formulation of deranged patriot militia groups that wormed their way into the MAGA resistance movement and infiltrated the mind of one guitarist of a semi-popular heavy metal band who was involved in what was at the time viewed as an unprecedented insurrection and now may soon be a minor bump in the road to full fascism.
Look, we got to get this off our chests before the new year, before we're not allowed to talk like this anymore. So you have to bear with us.
Yeah, so in the weeks before this podcast is banned and scrubbed from the internet, and Cal and I, are, as we've suggested before, lined up against the border wall and shot, I want you to know how all of this affected Iced Earth.
Yeah.
So welcome to Iced Earth Part 3. Of course, this is the story of a heavy metal guitarist who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. And it's been a long road. We've wound through, just this guy running away from Indiana, storming through the metal scene in Tampa, Florida, trying to get on the Spawn soundtrack, making some weird concept albums, and then getting involved in some Federal Reserve conspiracy theories. But now we finally get to the righty part of the story. You get to hear about how he was smashing windows at the Capitol building.
All right.
We're also going to talk about how Jon Schaffer responded to the disruption of COVID-19. I'm sure you already have some thoughts as to how that went for him. And finally, we are going to get to what is objectively, I think, the most unlistenable piece of music Iced Earth or perhaps any other artist has ever released.
Yeah, for my money and my taste, that is not an exaggeration.
I actually challenged you the other week, Cal, to see if you could listen to this album.
I didn't even try, dude. I
didn't either.
I would listen to all of Merzbow's discography, if you guys know who that is, before I would sit through this album.
No, I would rather re-listen to the entire Billy Ray discography.
Yeah.
This album is it's rough. It's gonna, more than anything else, you're gonna wonder, why did they put this out?
Yeah, because even the weirdest shit we've played there's some artistic merit there. Mm-hmm. I made an unlistenable album on purpose. That's art in a way. This is, this has no value.
No. But we are gonna get to that toward the end, so stay tuned. But before we get into any of that, I just want to real quick take one last look at this picture. Now, I know that you know what picture I'm talking about. This is the famous AP photograph of Jon Schaffer at the Capitol. This is the reason that he got arrested in the first place. Yeah, this is the
one that got him caught.
So if you haven't already, Google that photo. And if you can, just look at it. Look at this man. Look how angry he is. Look at his furrowed features, his mouth in mid-shout, his tuft of wilting white beard. Look at his finger pointed in righteous indignation against some unseen officer, a stand-in for his lifelong hatred of authority. This is a man with both nothing and everything to lose. His head has been filled with ideas, fearful ideas, the substance of which we've covered in our last episode. Without those ideas, this man would not be inside this building. But ideas alone are not enough. They need men to put them into action. And a good chunk of this episode is going to be about the men who helped mold Jon and thousands of others into violent insurrectionists. So, again, guys, this is going to be a bit of a long one. There's going to be a lot of history, a lot of education, but at least we're not talking about finance. Going to be very little mention of interest rates in this episode, I promise. I mean, what do you think about this? Like what we're going to cover today, as opposed to last time, Cal?
Well, there's violence now, so it's much more exciting right out the gate.
Yeah, this is more dude stuff. Like there's a tangible, like a human element to all of it, and this will excite the sadistic 11-year-old boy in many of you, I hope.
How many of us have not, in some way, dreamed of leading an insurrection?
No.
Not for any real reason, just in a movie sense. Like, it'd be kind of cool.
I've always fantasized about, like, fucking shit up.
Yeah.
Like in middle school, I used to have, like, very concrete, detailed fantasies about a day when all of us students would just, like, suddenly have this, like, grand, like, awakening where we'd all, like, rise up at once and start smashing up the entire school.
There's more of us than there is of them. Let's go.
And it was, like, so hyper specific that, like, this awakening, like, wouldn't include, like, the kids at school that I hated. Like,
yeah.
They would somehow be excluded or the wrath would be turned against them too. Like, it was messed up. I should have been seeing a counselor or something about this specific thing. But I'm grateful that, unlike some of the people that we're going to talk about today, it didn't fester into anything real when I grew up. But before we get to any of that, let's first bring ourselves back into the timeline of our story and see what Jon Schaffer was up to in the year or so leading to January 6th. Now, we're in early 2020, and obviously 2020 was a rough year for everyone. I don't think I have to explain why. Just consider the fact that for Jon specifically, he is relying on the live music industry as like pretty much his sole source of real income. And that is one of the things that is unambiguously shut down by the pandemic.
Yep.
And I think it's worth debating whether or not some of the economic and social effects of the various types of shutdowns, may have had lasting economic and psychological consequences for large populations of people that, may have in some instances outweighed the benefits of doing so from a health standpoint. I don't know.
That's hard to say, but I think it's undebatable. We're still seeing lingering effects.
Yeah. I mean,
that was an unprecedented time in almost everybody's life.
Absolutely. But while I think reasonable people can debate the costs and benefits of COVID shutdowns, Jon Schaffer saw the whole thing quite differently. To him, these were not flawed, if well-intentioned measures designed to protect public health. They were part of the globalist takeover that he, Alex Jones, G. Edward Griffin, and others had been warning about for years. Jon himself had preached about microchipped vaccines in the lyrics to his song Dystopia, the song that we played in our last episode. And the title of Iced Earth's 2014 album, Plagues of Babylon, must have seemed oddly prescient in retrospect.
This dude was like primed to believe everything he ever hears from the government's completely fake.
Yeah.
And he's writing all these albums about it, and then it starts to actually come true.
It's like,
there's no way he was going to handle COVID reasonably. Not
absolutely
a chance.
not. Like, just like, if the government like tells Jon Schaffer to not eat his own shit, be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
I'm reaching my hand up my ass right now. Thus, it should come as no surprise to hear Jon make comments like these in a podcast interview from July of 2020.
I believe this is a psychological warfare campaign on the people more than it is a serious pandemic. I think there's a lot more going on than meets the eye here. In fact, I know there is. I mean, legitimate doctors and scientists are being censored and banned on YouTube constantly. It's unbelievable levels of fraud. So I'm not saying that we don't have a problem, but the human race has faced this kind of thing for millennia. I mean, it just goes on, and we don't shut down the global economy. The death and unrest out of these decisions is going to be 1,000 times worse than the virus.
The death and unrest from the decision of shutting down the economy, you mean?
Yes, exactly.
How so? Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I think you'll see it. You're seeing it now, and you will see it further when the supply chains break down everywhere and we have a complete meltdown of the financial system. That's going to lead to starvation and death, and the third world will suffer from everything that's going on here. So it's we don't need to get into all this, because I think anybody that knows me knows where I stand, but I don't trust the government. I don't trust the bureaucrats, not at all, because I've actually read their game plan. I knew this was coming. I wrote about it, warned about it. People didn't want to pay attention.
I mean, he's not totally wrong about the consequences of shutting down the economy.
You mean in terms of like causing unrest?
Well, and ripple effect.
Yeah.
You know, we're seeing again problems from doing that years later.
Yes.
I understand where he's coming from. My beef is his reasoning. Exactly,
because I think that it is fair to say that the unintended consequences of COVID shutdowns were, may have meant that it wasn't worth doing. I'm very receptive to that argument, but the difference is I view those as truly unintended consequences.
Right.
Whereas he thinks that was the whole plan all along.
Right. Yes. It was not an evil plot. It's nobody has faced a global plague since like the Spanish flu. Like nobody just fucking knew what to do about it.
Yeah, exactly. And, we have people who are public health experts and we have people who are economists, and there's very little cross training in those two disciplines. So like, it's not reasonable to expect that we would know everything about what was going to happen. But like we said, like he is primed to believe that all of this is a conspiracy, because every book that he's been reading for the past 10 years is telling him that every single move the government makes is like this. So like,
yeah, there's always a man behind the curtain for everything.
And we're going to leave this interview up in our YouTube playlist, but you can already imagine where he's going to go with thoughts like these. He talks about how COVID death statistics are fake, how, the entire Federal Reserve System controls, the central banks and all the elite groups. He specifically mentions the creature from Jekyll Island at multiple points. He uses the term plandemic because fucking of course.
Am I the only one? I know he did this years ago, but am I the only one who's so fucking sick of made up, smashed words? Yeah. I am so over it.
At the end of this conversation, the host, who's really like not being combative at all, like didn't want to talk about politics, really just wanted to know that like a guy that he respects and musically is like safe during this troubled time. The host signs off with "Stay safe," to which Jon replies, "I'll stay free."
Oh my God.
I mean, it's ain't nobody gonna tell me how to live.
He's definitely that man who takes personal offense if you say, "Sir, masks are required in here."
Oh my, yeah, dude. I saw a guy with the Tesla, here in Madison that had a license plate that said "masks suck."
It's like, dude, it's over.
Yeah, no,
shut up.
It's how is that a part of? I understand being opposed to that, like, kind of, like, but making it a part of your identity. Like,
yeah, it's pretty weird.
Like, how are you going to, like, pick up girls in that thing? Or do you just not care anymore?
Trad wife,
yeah.
He's only interested in them. And that's, again, one of those terms that is just starting to bug me, stuff like that.
Yeah. And, like, what I came away with this interview is just how, like, a paranoid and apocalyptic Jon's whole vision is. He truly believes like that all of this is leading to some very dark horror movie end, and anyone who disagrees with him is brainwashed by the propaganda of the deep state.
Yeah, it's a little weird to be like this at his age. I'm sorry if that's a distraction, but I remember being that intense when I was in my 20s. Someone would try and have a normal conversation with me and I'd turn it into something about this big thing going wrong in the earth. But I grew out of that, and it feels like he's worse about it now than he ever had been.
I think you're right, Cal. And because I too, like, used to be a lot more dire about my political opinions, like back in like the Obama years, like, you know, back in the 2010s.
In hindsight, things were going pretty good.
Yeah, I mean,
besides the recession,
there were warning signs of like what the kind of slide that we're currently into. But like, I used to go around saying unironically we were living in the last days of Rome, that like truly the American empire was about to collapse, like more immediately than I would have understood if I could flash forward to today. And then over time, I feel like I kind of like gradually accepted more and more of it. You know,
that's where I'm at now.
My views haven't changed, but like I just understand. Okay, well, like shit is really fucked up, but like, you know,
it's out of my control.
You know, but like I have a 401k now, so like I can kind of wade my way through it. But like the guy like Jon, like he was always intense. Like we've talked about shit that he did as a teenager that suggested this type of personality. And it felt like that was leveling off at a certain point, like maybe in his 30s, you know, like when he's doing the Glorious Burden album or whatever. But then it just got reignited by all of this awakening that he had. And it's almost like he's having like a second adolescence.
Yeah, it's like an extinction burst or something.
Yeah. And to me, it's all related to trauma. Like that's what this whole, you know, series arc is about, as a man responding to trauma by, you know, hiding in political extremism. So with that in mind, let's flash forward to November 14th of 2020. So obviously the presidential election has just happened, and Donald Trump, who was the patron saint of all anti-maskers, he has lost the presidential election. He refuses to concede, you know, so now all of his supporters are demanding to stop the steal, you know, as they said. So on November 14th, Jon Schaffer is in Washington, D.C., and he is at a protest called the Million MAGA March. And at some point during this event, Jon is approached by a representative from a German news outlet called Die Welt, and he makes this statement live on camera.
My name's Jon Schaffer. I'm from Indiana. A group of thugs and criminals hijacked this country a long time ago. Now they're making their big move, and it's not going to happen. And that's what it is. These are globalists. These are the scum of the earth. These are the criminals that are behind all the fraudulent fiat currency. They're behind all the wars. They're behind all the shit. They're behind divide and conquer tactics, behind the racial divide. It's all nonsense. It's all garbage. People need to wake up and snap out of the matrix, because they're going down. They've made the move. They're messing with the wrong people here. Trust me on that. And we needed it to be open like this. Open fraud, open theft. Because now we see you, and you're going down. Mark my words.
Are you expecting some sort of violence? Are you expecting to clash with some other groups?
If somebody wants to bring violence, I think there's a lot of us here that are ready for it. We don't want that, but if they bring it, we're gonna respond to that. Trust me.
Okay, so you're prepared for that?
Absolutely.
This is one of those things where you can tell, like, he's really caught up in the moment.
Yeah.
You know, this is what is so dangerous about crowds and groupthink. He genuinely feels like he's living his moment, and the energy is there. You've got all these other people that are amped up, ready to go. It's happening right now. He's amped up.
Absolutely. And every single person that he's marching with feels the exact same way.
It's almost like you're waiting for a concert to start or something. Like, you're in tune with this large group right now.
Absolutely. Like, mass psychology is a very powerful and terrifying thing. And it's just so easy to lose the self in any situation like that. So Jon in that clip says that he doesn't want violence, but I think that's kind of bullshit. Like, I think clearly...
No, this is his moment, man. This is the revolution. Like,
yeah, he's
ready to do anything.
He is full on LARPing. He is the Stormrider in that situation. Like, he is clearly hoping for some kind of battle, and so is everyone around him. But the other thing that I wanted to mention about that clip is the fact that Jon keeps using the term we. Like, we're not going to let this happen. We're ready for violence. We don't want violence, but we're ready to respond to them. And I think that this begs the question, who is that we that Jon is talking about? One would assume that he means Trump supporters or Republicans or people who voted for Trump, but I actually think it is much more narrow than that. You see, at this rally, Jon was marching alongside members of a far-right militia called the Oath Keepers, one of many extremist groups represented at the Million MAGA March, and one of the groups that, weeks later, would play a key role in the violence that unfolded on January 6th. At the time, the Oath Keepers were one of the largest and most well-known Patriot militia groups in the country, with as many as 38,000 members. They were also recognized as an anti-government hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Jon himself was a quote-unquote lifetime member of the Oath Keepers and had been promoting the group as far back as his days with Sons of Liberty in 2009. So who are these Oath Keeper dudes anyway? What oath are they keeping? And what could have compelled a guy like Jon Schaffer to join them? Well, that is what we're going to spend a good chunk of this episode exploring. And while many of the ideas, tactics, and men behind this group are, to put it bluntly, fucking moronic, the fact is that the threat posed by groups like this is deadly serious, and they are a central component of any attempt at a fascist system. Every, fascist or authoritarian takeover of any kind, doesn't just start with the leader. It starts with ordinary groups of thugs taking over the streets with rough violence.
You need the foot soldiers. That makes sense.
Absolutely. But in order to understand the Oath Keepers, we have to talk a little bit about the ideological tradition they come from, the so-called Patriot movement.
America!
You can kind of imagine the kind of guy that we're talking about. Picture the dude who makes a point of showing up at a Walmart with an AR-15 on his back because it's my right, goddammit. If you live in the United States, you will inevitably run into these people anywhere outside of a major population.
I was going to say, I feel like as soon as you leave a city, 1/3 of the people are this person.
Pretty much, yeah. And what I want to kind of show here is that it doesn't seem like guys like that would have an intellectual ideology to draw from, but they do. These guys, these populations of people don't just wake up thinking like this. Every idea they have or every attitude they have has a traceable intellectual history, and that's true of everybody. So with that in mind, let's take some time to dissect the ideas, people, and events that made the Patriot world a reality. Now, I'm just going to breeze through this. All these movements that I'm going to mention are worthy of their own study and their own episode, but I'm going to hit some bullet points of certain terms and groups and ideas I want you guys to understand.
It's like an impressionist painting of bullshit.
This is a turd kaleidoscope of very noxious, bad people, from 200 years worth of history. So, number one, we have the John Birch Society. And we've already talked about these guys, so I'm not going to go on at length. I just want to reiterate how important this group was in steering the American right toward where they're at today. These guys all but invented the concept of the New World Order and were responsible for spreading all of that bullshit way back in the 50s. So another thing I want to talk about is the Christian identity movement. This is where some of the ideas of race and religion come into the picture. The Christian identity movement was a specifically white supremacist branch of Christianity that took hold in mid-20th century America. This movement asserts that Anglo-Saxon and Celtic people are the true descendants of the Israelites, and modern Jews are just an imposter. Got it, Cal?
Okay.
It will shock you to learn that most historians and ethnographers and archaeologists tend to disagree with that.
They went up to Scotland for no reason.
Yeah, it's just all right. These are just guys who looked at pictures of Jesus paintings from Sunday school and took that as literally as possible. It's like, what do you mean Jesus was a Jew? He looks like me.
No, yeah, he's on my team.
So I love that, but that's going to be that's going to play a role in the story. Similarly, you have something called the Christian Reconstructionist movement. This is an extreme fundamentalist political movement that argues that all of society, including the government, should be built around biblical law. Like,
oh God. So this is like Christian Taliban shit.
Literally,
Christian
yeah.
ISIS.
This is Christian Taliban shit. Like, just think of like Mike Pence taken to its like reductio ad absurdum, you know, like where like literally they want the punishment for the legal punishment for homosexuality to be like death by stoning. Like you would go to a court and that would be your sentence. And then like they fucking throw stones at you until you're dead. Like, and as like fucking horrific as that sounds, it's shockingly common in this country.
These are the same fucking people that like what's the punishment for like letting certain cloths touch your skin? Like, do I get to cut your hand off now? Like, no, it's biblical law as it applies to what I like is the asterisk on what they had when they believe this shit.
No, and it's super fucked up. Like you could never institute all of the laws in Deuteronomy, like
no,
and have a modern society.
Each other constantly.
Yeah, I know. Just like it would just be the most miserable life possible. But basically, these people just see every twist and turn of politics as a literal apocalyptic struggle between heaven and hell. And it might sound like they're just a bunch of backward redneck idiots, but there are like serious academics and influential thinkers that are involved in this movement. And one guy I want to talk about is a guy named Gary North. Gary North was a quote-unquote Christian economist who basically married the Christian Reconstructionist idea with libertarian economics, you know, kind of like the gold standard shit that we talked about in our last episode. So he went around arguing that not only is the Federal Reserve bad and inflation bad, but they're also against God's law. And the reason why this guy and his ideas matter is that he was a very close, longtime associate of a guy named Ron Paul, whom you've all heard of, and he is going to play a big role in this story pretty soon. And then finally, Cal, I've talked about this with you in private. Like, sometimes I can't shut up about it because it's so fucking weird to me that this exists. But I want to talk about something called Posse Comitatus, aka the Constitutional Sheriff Movement, which is related to the theology of Mormon constitutionalism. Now, what the fuck is all that? Well, this is a movement that emerged in the Western United States during the late 1960s. Much of it is rooted in fundamentalist Mormon theology, but this system basically postulates that the highest level of government authority that anyone should have to answer to is the county sheriff. like all of the federal government doesn't matter at all. They have no jurisdiction over any part of anyone's life outside of like DC and like a handful of forts that exist. But like the only person that matters government wise is your local county sheriff.
How do these people think the world works? Like when you let's say I'm a big sack of shit and I find a way to become sheriff. Am I allowed to rape now? Is that what they're arguing? Like I'm the highest authority in the fucking land?
There's something called the divine magistrate that goes all the way back to Calvinism, and like some of this is drawing from that, but like it goes back to the idea that like there's no true authority but God. Therefore, like you can't really have to answer to the government because like God's the only one that really matters.
It's just such a half-ass though, because like if that's true, then just do anarchy straight up. The sheriff, you're still assigning authority to some guy. Yeah, I mean, the
sheriff's like an intermediary with God somehow,
right? And that system has existed in different forms all through the world, and I hate it. It's the dumbest setup. You cannot give one guy all the power and say you're good.
No, it's extremely fucked up, and it's rooted in less in like a coherent, like from the ground ideology, and more of just like I'm pissed off that the Bureau of Land Management says that I can't cut down this rainforest, you know?
No, I can see that. If you're like in a rural Utah town, you probably have this romantic idea of I'm the sheriff in these parts. And if you
that's 100% where it comes from.
Yeah, and if you want to like do a bunch of weird shit on your land, the sheriff says he's cool with it, but then the government comes and says they're not, and you don't know who they are or where they're from. Okay, I get why that's annoying.
Yeah, no, that's a big part of it.
But to go back to my first point, there is major issues if you're in a rural community and everyone answers to one man.
Yeah.
That's a cult situation, essentially.
100%. And is it surprising that a group of hardcore Mormons would develop a cult system like this? So here's where we're going to play our first song of the day. And this is a first in that I just found this song randomly on YouTube. I have no idea who recorded it, who wrote it, or where it comes from, but it's called Posse Comitatus, and it ties in directly to everything we just talked about. So I'm going to play it for you guys just to set the scene a little bit.
Mystery box.
All you brave men of the Posse Comitatus, there is tyranny in the land. So rally round, brothers, for the fight for our freedom is about to begin once again. We may have to string up some tyrants or bureaucratic usurpers pursue, but then let's not be sentimentalist boys, for they've shown no mercy on you. All you brave men of the Posse Comitatus, let's put on that bright shining star. Financiers have stolen our gold and our silver, now that's going just a little too far. Oh, we may have to lynch a few bankers and an IRS agent or two, but then let's not be sentimentalist boys, just give as they gave unto you.
You know, Kyle, I will say one thing about that song. I admire this man's restraint in saying that he wants to lynch bankers as opposed to just Jews.
Yeah.
he really had to hold himself back on that one.
Yeah. So I did a little research, and that was written in 2023. No, I'm just kidding.
It could have come out yesterday or in like 1970, like based off of what I've heard. If any of you guys know like who is responsible for that, let us know. Don't let that guy know that we exist.
Yeah, I don't know.
The Posse Comitatus is probably going to come for us. But that's kind of the vibe of what I'm talking about. And that is emblematic of the milieu out of which is going to emerge a lot of these patriot militia groups that over time are going to metastasize into the violent parts of the MAGA movement. Throughout the 70s and 80s, a growing number of men in the Western U.S. became increasingly bitter and hostile toward the U.S. government, partly because of new environmental laws that changed the way that public lands were used, but also, I think, because they correctly saw that society was changing and seeming to slip beyond their control. But there are three standout incidents that energized the Patriot militia movement, all happening within a few short years in the 90s. And again, I'm going to breeze past some very, very important stuff. But Cal, have you heard of something called Ruby Ridge?
I don't think I've heard of this one.
So this happened in 1992. This incident started with a radicalized Idaho man named Randy Weaver. Now, Randy was a member of the Christian Identity movement. Remember, those are the guys who think that Jesus was Anglo-Saxon and so were all the Israelites. So he was a member of the Christian Identity movement who had been served a warrant for selling sawed-off shotguns. So, like, he's being summoned to court for, like, selling illegal firearms. And when he refused to appear in court, U.S. Marshals surrounded his property out in the Idaho forest. Long story short, a firefight broke out, and it got really ugly, and by the end of it, a federal agent was dead, and so were Randy Weaver, his friend Kevin Harris, Randy's 12-year-old son Samuel, and Randy's wife Vicky, who was shot with a young baby in her hands. So this became like a big PR disaster for the federal government. Like, you know, whatever intentions they had going in, it was widely perceived that they botched this.
Yeah.
And it just ended with a gigantic bloody mess.
They did botch it.
No, they definitely did. And again, like, to people who were already primed to view the entire government at any level for any intention.
They're not going to view it as incompetence. They're going to view it as maliciousness.
That's exactly how they viewed it. And to them, this was confirmation of every, like, horrible paranoid thought that they had about the federal government. And then, very similarly, you had another incident next year in Waco, Texas. I'm sure most people have heard of this.
Yeah, this one I know.
Yeah, so this was a standoff at the Branch Davidian compound where this cult kind of lived. And, you know, the federal government surrounded this compound because these guys were stockpiling weapons illegally and also suspected of abusing children, which they probably were. But this too just devolved into a complete disaster that resulted in just dozens of people dying, and the federal government got blamed for it.
Well, if I remember right, they made the call to light the compound on fire.
Yeah.
And in doing so, even the kids that were in there died.
Yeah, they did. Like, you know, basically just the situation was very tense and they got a little too trigger happy. And there's some stuff that's come out recently about how, like, maybe like the Branch Davidians actually started firing first. So it's not a total persecution thing too, but also, like, again, this could have been handled way, way better.
Yeah.
And the net effect was to castigate the entire institution of the federal government with permanent suspicion in the eyes of these right-wing rural people.
Right. When in reality, it's just a tragedy. They happen.
Yeah.
There's not always some grand conspiracy.
It's almost easy to see how these people could think that it was.
Yes.
You know, like this.
Well, the Branch Davidians are just out there being American.
Yeah. Like Waco, like, just became like this byword for government malfeasance. Like Alex Jones, like, actually built a lot of his radio broadcasting career out of criticizing this incident, you know, down in Texas. Like, this is as important to the mythology of far-right narratives as 9/11 was to George W. Bush and the War on Terror, you know? And so as a direct response to the tragedy of Waco, you had the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995. Now, this was committed by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nicholson, who were not militia members per se, but they were very much influenced by and adjacent to the Patriot movement. So this was kind of like almost like a coming out party for that branch of underground domestic terrorism. I have a vivid memory of this happening and our second grade teacher holding up the newspaper and, like, trying to explain to us, like, 7-year-olds, like, what had happened and how to make sense of it. Like, it was like one of the first incidents in my life that I can remember of, like, a mass public tragedy involving death.
I was going to a private ass school. They didn't show us shit.
They hid everything from you.
Yeah, I had no idea anything like this happened.
It's like the outside world is nothing but rainbow and unicorns.
Yep.
You have nothing to fear. You're all white. You're all special. This
More or less.
This is how you become an engineer, folks. Become shielded from the tragedies of the world.
You joke, but that is 100% true.
So from there on, the whole militia movement kind of died down a little bit, but it was brought back to life in 2005 when you had the border militia groups like the Minutemen start cropping up. Now, the Minutemen are, of course, a punk rock group from San Pedro, California, best known for their double album, Double Nickels on the Dime. These Minutemen are actually motherfuckers that, like, used to patrol the southern border, like, basically just waiting for Mexicans to cross so they can shoot them.
Oh, God.
And, like, yeah, if you want to know why the debate over the border today is so fucking insane, it starts with these people.
Can't these guys just, like, take up bird watching when they're bored? Why does it have to be killing Mexicans?
Why can't it just be killing animals?
Right.
Just go hunting.
Yeah. Don't LARP border patrol agents.
I know. It's so fucking ridiculous. Now, next we have to talk about Ron Paul. He keeps cropping up. Ron Paul is fucking central to all this shit.
He's my favorite little elf man.
Yeah. Ron Paul, in case you don't know, is a radical libertarian congressman from rural Texas who sat in Congress for decades without really having much of an impact. But then in 2008, he ran for president on an anti-establishment message that seemed to capture the spirit of the times. His campaign attracted enthusiastic support from voters across the political spectrum, including this guy.
Dr. Paul, here's a song for you. Watch out for the Washington Blues. Jefferson and Martin Luther King would be honored by you. Your destination is communication, the truth you hold dear. In God we trust, in God I trust you. Ron Paul, I wish you well, man. It seems to me you're the best man for the job. Hundreds of thousands in prison for petty crimes. Some of them were getting high.
Yeah, some people take up music to get laid, and other people take a little different path.
I almost wonder if like the guy who wrote the theme song for the show Arthur like just fell down a libertarian rabbit hole and like made that song. I love that.
Dude, I hate to say it. When Ron Paul's a thing, now keep in mind I was very young. I kind of fell down the rabbit hole a little bit. I remember liking Ron Paul, and looking back, I realize now like he was the prototype meme candidate.
He was. I truly think that his candidacy paved the way for both Bernie in 2016 and Donald Trump, like basically ever after. Like he pioneered the idea of using social media and internet thinking and internet speech to drive a campaign.
Yep.
It was
I still use sometimes the Ron Paul "It's Happening" gif where he's like, shaking his hands like jazz hands looking. It says it's happening. I still use that. Like he was the OG meme.
No, and like it was because like he struck people as authentic, which he is, like for all of his faults. Like people were starting to get fed up with the way things were, and they wanted somebody who was different. And he was the first guy to just like articulate that in any way, shape, or form. It's really only when you dive into what his ideology actually is and the history of that ideology, some of which we covered in our last episode, that you realize how just insane all of his ideas were. And like, if everything he wanted to do was implemented, like, sure, like we'd be in fewer wars and, weed would be legal, but you'd also have the entire economy collapse because we have to be on the gold standard now.
If he had used that song as his campaign song, he might have won.
Maybe that just didn't get enough play. That was competing with Will.i.am's Obama song. The point about Ron Paul is that he's got this very hardcore libertarian ideology, and yet somehow he's attracting attention from like just a wide swath of people, like kind of like normal, like left of center guys like us, as well as some like anarchists, some like homeschooling evangelical Christians were way into him. Obviously the longtime libertarians loved this guy, but so too did almost every patriot militia guy, every white supremacist, every card-carrying white nationalist. Like they were really into Ron Paul, and they had people very high up in his circle. Like, remember Gary North, who the Christian Reconstructionist guy who thinks that God wants us on the gold standard? He had been a Ron Paul staffer since all the way back in 1976. So this kind of just creates this shared intellectual space where all of these different weirdo movements of the far right are coming together, and that's going to be very important in shaping what's to come. And then finally, I want to talk about something that you probably haven't heard of. This is the 2009 Constitutional Convention. So this was an event that I didn't even know about before I started researching this episode. This was a getting together of a few dozen or so really influential leaders of different far-right movements that were starting to kind of coalesce in the wake of Ron Paul's campaign. And this group of people met on the actual site of Jekyll Island in May of 2009. They're getting revenge.
Yeah,
they're going to stab the creature to death once and for all.
They are not going to miss that narrative opportunity.
No.
To do something like significant like that.
100%. So according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, this meeting, quote, appears to have played a key role in launching the current resurgence of militias and the larger anti-government Patriot movement.
It's almost too funny. Like, they came out and made a real creature from Jekyll Island.
It's like, well, all the guys that we don't like conspired at Jekyll Island. So
let's go do it the same thing.
I wonder if they literally thought that there was some kind of mystical orb hiding on the island that the Fed guys drew their power from. Maybe if they found it,
I found the Palantir of the Fed.
Yeah. So these guys get together. It's really just several hundred people, but each person at that convention is a big player in some segment of the radical right-wing universe. And this included militia leaders, radio hosts, academics, activists, etc. And some of the people involved were really kind of out there, including a guy named Edward Steele, who was an open white nationalist and had once defended the Aryan nations in court and was a vocal Holocaust denier. So great company being at this Jekyll Island. I'd rather be at the first Jekyll Island, honestly.
No shit. You might get rich at least doing that one.
Right. So this convention focused on the alleged abuses by the Obama administration that were supposedly collapsing the republic and threatening our liberties. And one of the men who helped organize this conference and was its opening speaker was none other than G. Edward Griffin. Speaking of strategy, Griffin claimed that having, quote, large numbers of people on the street was not enough. We must achieve power. And in the fullness of time, they would. So, this finally brings us to the point in time where the Oath Keepers come into the picture. Now, as we just mentioned, the 2008 Ron Paul campaign attracted a wide array of right-wing cranks, conspiracists, and militants into a shared intellectual space. And one of the men occupying that space was a guy named Elmer Stewart Rhodes. Cal, I have a picture of Stewart Rhodes in front of you. This is actually his mugshot.
I don't even know where you start with this dude.
Describe what you're seeing.
He looks exactly he looks like a Metal Gear Solid villain. He looks like a Metal Gear Solid's take on what a militia leader looks like. Because he literally has a fucking eye patch on.
Yeah.
And his whole demeanor and attitude in the mugshot just screams I have lived my entire life with a giant chip on my shoulder.
Is there a reason to have an eye patch in the 2000s? Don't we have better technology?
No, he could have a prosthetic eye if it's correct. It's not correcting a lazy eye because you do that on children.
Do you want to know how he got that patch? Actually,
yes.
He was teaching a gun safety class, and he dropped a pistol and shot himself in the face.
Wow.
And that kind of tells you everything you need to know about Stewart Rhodes. So Stewart Rhodes is currently serving 18 years in prison for seditious conspiracy. Now that is unless he is pardoned by our incoming president, which is incredibly likely on the table. Definitely a likely scenario. And I will say, when I said in our last episode that G. Edward Griffin was one of the creepiest guys in this story, I actually think he is a distant second behind Stewart Rhodes. Stewart Rhodes is an evil motherfucker, and 18 years is not enough for him, and you will soon see why. Rhodes, a Yale-educated lawyer and former Army paratrooper, was animated equally by his own delusions of grandeur and by a militant defiance of what he saw as government overreach. In 2004, he won a prize at Yale for his research paper criticizing the use of the designation enemy combatants by the Bush administration. Like, he actually starts out as like a somewhat reasonable libertarian guy.
Yep.
After serving as an aide to Ron Paul for several years, Stewart founded the Oath Keepers in 2009. According to the group's official propaganda, the mission of the Oath Keepers is to prevent the formation of a police state in America by reminding law enforcement officers to follow their oath to the U.S. Constitution. So far, so good, right?
Yeah, seems harmless.
The group primarily targets former and active duty soldiers and police officers, encouraging them to disobey unjust orders in order to preserve the American freedom. Again, so far, so good, right?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the definition of these things, I am sure as we get into it.
Yeah. So the Oath Keepers on paper have 10 orders that all officers are sworn to disobey. So if you're a cop and you're a member of the Oath Keepers, you're not going to obey any of these 10 things. Number 1, we will not obey any orders to disarm the American people.
I already got to stop you. Does that mean if I'm a cop and I say, drop your weapon, does that count?
That's when the Family Guy meme of the cop with the skin-colored shirt comes into play.
Yeah, because, that's technically disarming someone. I know I'm being a dick. What they mean is taking people's guns Obama style.
No, but like literally, if you take that to its logical conclusion,
right.
It's like, like a guy wielding an M16 around in a shopping mall shooting people.
He's allowed to do that. Him. He's allowed to do that.
It's like, I could walk into an elementary school with a rocket launcher and the Oath Keepers would not stop me. So number 2, we will not obey orders to conduct warrantless searches of the American people.
All right, that I'm into.
Totally fine with that. Number 3, we will not obey orders to detain American citizens as unlawful enemy combatants or subject them to a military tribunal.
Sure.
Yep. We will not obey orders to impose martial law or a state of emergency on a state.
100% yes.
Yeah. We will not obey orders to invade or subjugate any state that asserts its own sovereignty. So it's time for Wisconsin to secede from the Union, baby.
All right.
Oath Keepers ain't stopping us. We will not obey any order to blockade American cities, thus turning them into giant concentration camps. Kind of wish there were more Oath Keepers in Israel.
Yeah,
right now.
Okay, yep.
Number 7, we will not obey any order to force American citizens into any form of detention camps under any pretense. Number 8, we will not obey orders to assist or support the use of foreign troops on U.S. soil against the American people to keep the peace or maintain control. Again, this fucking fantasy that, we're going to invite, fucking French soldiers to New York?
Who is going to, especially with through their own acknowledgement already, how armed everybody is in America, who is going to come here and detain us and keep peace? And
again,
in theory, fine. I don't want that. I'm glad they're protecting us. But
yeah, right. 9, we will not obey any orders to confiscate the property of the American people, including food or any other supplies. 10, we will not obey any orders which infringe on the right of the people to free speech, to peaceably assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances.
All right, so I like this list in general. Tell me how they fuck it up.
We're going to see how they fuck it up. But, on paper, at the start...
It's fine. This is reasonable shit.
It's completely reasonable stuff. Now, how likely is it that we're going to blockade American cities? I would say that's kind of tilting at windmills a little bit, but hey,
Yep, I'm with you.
It's like if you just as you and your wife are cooking breakfast tomorrow morning, you could just kiss your wife on the cheek before you leave to work and say I'm not going to throw shit at my boss this morning. I'm not going to drive my car into the middle of a Pizza Hut. I promise. I make an oath to you, honey. I am not going to set the house on fire this morning, and I will disobey anyone who orders me to. Now, while it sounds reasonable, a slightly deeper dive into Rhodes' writings reveal a much darker, more paranoid vision of American politics. The following quote is taken from an essay that Stewart wrote for something called SWAT Magazine in 2008.
I gotta check that shit out.
Yeah, just visit your local truck stop in Central Illinois for the latest copy of SWAT, I guess. But he wrote this in 2008, and keep in mind that it was at a time when it was assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to be the Democratic nominee for president that year. So that's why you're going to hear some of the references you do. So Stewart writes, quote, "A full-blown totalitarian police state cannot happen here if the majority of police and soldiers obey their oaths to defend the Constitution and refuse to endorse the unconstitutional edicts of the leader. Imagine that Herr Hitlery is sworn in as president in 2009.
He looks like the kind of guy that thinks that's the most clever joke he's ever come up with.
I know. There were high fives at the local McDonald's when he came up with that line. After a conveniently timed domestic terrorism incident, parentheses, just a coincidence, of course, or yet another Prozac-induced mass shooting, she promptly crams the United Nations mandated Great Britain-style total ban on the private possession of firearms through a compliant, democratically controlled Congress. Dressed in her favorite Chairman Mao pantsuit,
that's kind of funny.
Yeah. Hitlery signs the ban into law with the obligatory choir of sellout police chiefs as backdrop. But Hitlery goes further, proclaiming a national emergency and declaring the entire militia movement to be enemy combatants. Using precedents established by Bush, Hitlery declares that such citizens are subject to secret military detention without indictment or jury trial, enhanced interrogation techniques, and trial before a military tribunal handpicked by the dominatrix-in-chief herself. Hitlery then orders police, National Guard troops, and active military to go house to house to disarm the American people and black bag those on a list of known terrorists with orders to shoot all resistors.
This is just like a child's imagination. Like, this guy, what happened in his life that makes him think this is an imminent possibility? And when is the last time he's even spoken to a woman?
You know, it's interesting. He had a wife of like almost 20 years. According to some like podcasts and interviews that I've heard featuring his wife, she basically like supported him like doggedly throughout all of his years through Yale. Like he didn't come from a rich family. He grew up kind of poor, and he worked his way into Yale. And like he always like had this view that he was going to be this really important guy, you know, but he genuinely worked hard to get where he got in life. Although a lot of that was because his wife was like writing a lot of his college essays. She basically underwrote a lot of the shit that allowed him to like graduate from Yale and get to being a congressional staffer for Ron Paul. But like he had a family, and he was a normal guy who just gradually got weirder and weirder. And I think like at this time in 2008, if you probably met him at a bar, you'd probably have a decent conversation with him. But like there's also that other side of him where like he clearly read The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Oh yeah.
You know, he clearly is into all this shit.
No, he fits the three descriptors of people that believe in conspiracies, like
exactly.
to a T.
100%. And
he's imagining persecution that is not gonna happen.
And more importantly, he's writing for people who are like a good 10 to 15 IQ points lower than him, you know, who like are probably believe this much more aggressively than he does.
Well, and again, so like, you know, we've got Trump coming to this presidency now. Even with that threat, I don't feel compelled to write something like this and create a whole group defending against.
Now, this is a guy who literally says that like he wants to round up the enemy within and deport them, but like guys like us are like, this motherfucker.
Yeah.
Oh well.
I think that's
playing,
normal.
You know,
Americans' reaction to most government shit.
Yeah.
But every now and then you get people like this that are just convinced we're one step away from being a complete fascist state.
Yeah. And I don't understand why they are so scared that they're coming for your guns. Like, there's never been any meaningful gun control regulation passed in the past 30 years. Just nothing to base this on.
No, I know.
Regardless, like, this was the kind of rhetoric that he was writing and preaching when he founds the Oath Keepers. And this group became extremely popular in a very short amount of time. And part of that, I think, is because he had access to all these guys that were close with Ron Paul, so like he's like very well connected in Washington at this point. And so he's close to like a lot of these like Christian Reconstructionist groups and like gun rights groups and militia groups. And this is part of the process of all these people like just merging into one network. And within a year of the founding of the Oath Keepers, they had chapters in all 50 states, and they were like becoming real players in this far-right militia scene. Now, at first, the Oath Keepers went to great lengths to portray themselves as something more moderate and respectable than your typical right-wing nutjob militia. They advertised themselves as nonpartisan, a mere advocacy group, reminding officers to honor the oath they'd already made. They openly disavowed white nationalism on their website and bragged about having a black vice president. They even eschewed the term militia itself, referring to the armed groups they trained as, quote, community preparedness teams.
I just love that they have to brag about their black vice president.
Yeah,
I have a black friend.
Exactly. It's just like it's classic time-honored tactic, of I can't be racist.
Look at my African American over there.
Yeah, I'm sure they kept him up on the website long after he like left the group, But like, I think this also speaks to Stewart's training as a lawyer, that like he knows that like if you switch around a few words here or there, you can make an idea seem way less toxic. Even still, from the get-go, there were plenty of violent criminals and general insane people in the Oath Keeper ranks.
No way.
Yeah. So I'm going to share like a few little stories with you, and I could have gone on for way, way longer. But in April of 2010, a Georgia Oath Keeper named Daniel Huff was arrested for driving up to a Tennessee courthouse with loaded firearms and ammunition. Huff, a minister and member of the Christian Identity Movement, said he planned to take over the courthouse and arrest those who refused to indict President Obama on birther-related claims.
Fucking Christ.
I'm not sure that's how justice works, Cal.
Yep, no.
I don't think you can just like point a gun at a judge and demand that he arrest the president for being born in Kenya.
You handed judgment down on me once. You can do it to him.
Yeah. And then about a month after that incident, the president of an Oath Keepers chapter in Cleveland was arrested on explosives and child pornography charges. In addition to CP, he had a live napalm bomb in his house, which is his constitutional right, Cal.
Yeah, I mean, that's average Cleveland stuff.
You never know when the Viet Cong are going to break into your garage. You might just need some napalm. And then, similarly, equally disturbingly, in 2010, a high-ranking Oath Keeper named Charles Dyer was arrested for raping his 7-year-old daughter. I'm very sorry about how dark that story is, but I just feel like you need to know that these are the kind of people that Stewart Rhodes is walking around shaking hands with.
That's the type of person. I'm going to generalize a lot here, but like that's in my mind the kind of guy that joins the Oath Keepers.
No shit.
Not necessarily child rapist, but I mean they happen to have one. But the kind of guy that everything that's ever happened to him is the world's fault, and the world always owes him something.
Oh yeah,
that's the mindset you need to do something like that to a child. You need complete selfishness.
You need to just break every single norm that has ever been taught to you by someone else in society, and you need justification.
And at the end of the day, too, when you get caught, there's nothing wrong with me. I didn't do anything wrong. This is you find a way to rationalize it. And that's the type of personality. Again, I know this is a massive generalization.
Honestly, I don't think you're off base, Cal, because just reading into this whole movement and these types of people, as I did for months while researching this topic, I was honestly shocked by how often this type of thing would come up, where like the leader of some like far-right militia group would be arrested for child pornography or be involved in some horrific act of sexual violence against a minor. I think they're a lot more connected than all
right, so uncomfortably large Venn diagram between these groups.
I think so. I don't think that's an unfair generalization to make. And even long before January 6th, the Oath Keepers had already developed a reputation for dramatically inserting themselves into tense, violent situations. So again, I'm going to breeze through some big like stories here, but these are just like kind of like, this is like a greatest hits reel of some of the things that the Oath Keepers did like during the 2010s. So probably the most famous thing was in April of 2014, you had something that's sometimes called the Battle of Bunkerville or the Bundy Ranch standoff. So this is a incident where a guy named Cliven Bundy, who was a cattle rancher in Nevada, he got into like this long-standing, like 20-year dispute with the Federal Bureau of Land Management. What happened was he was letting his cattle graze on public lands, which you're allowed to do if you pay a fee, like just like a certain amount per cattle head. And from what I've read, it doesn't seem that unreasonable. Mm-hmm. But Cliven Bundy, who was like a big posse comitatus guy, he decided that the federal government doesn't have any jurisdiction over him, and he decided to stop paying the fees for his cattle to graze on this public land.
It's like the exact scenario we painted.
Yeah. Like,
I don't know who you are. It's like the end of his argument.
Exactly. Like, don't you wish that you could just do this all the time? Like, I mean, some people do, and it ends
I was going
horribly.
to say, it sounds like you can.
And he got away with this for a really long time.
You can.
Like, there were like years, like literal decades of court battles between the feds suing him and him countersuing the feds. And like, just finally the feds just decided, okay, well, we have no choice. We're going to impound your cattle if you're not going to pay the grazing fees. And so when the Bureau of Land Management agents showed up to his property, he assembled a bunch of militia guys to literally point guns at federal officers, and the feds backed down.
I love it. It's like modern Wild West.
It is.
You're going to have to give him back them cattle.
Yeah, no. It's just like every fucking dude's like fucking fantasy, like Carhartt fucking fantasy.
You know he went to bed that night and absolutely had the best wank of his life. He's like, I just backed off the U.S. government.
Well, he's a Mormon, Cal, so like he
put it in one of his procreate. Yeah, no, he did it with one of his child brides.
Yes,
gotcha.
Exactly. Or maybe one of his newly liberated cattle.
Yeah.
But and then he actually won in court later on, So just justice. But the point is that the Oath Keepers were one of the militia groups that were involved in this standoff. And then later in that same year, 2014, the Oath Keepers got involved in the Ferguson, Missouri protests. These are the protests that emerged, the Black Lives Matter protests that happened after the police shot a teenager named Michael Brown. So the Oath Keepers showed up completely uninvited. Like, the members of the community were really kind of perplexed as to why they were there. But the Oath Keepers said that they were there to, quote, protect businesses. And they were often seen standing on top of rooftops of local businesses with assault rifles. And again, like, think about the 10 oaths that they...
Does this fit any of them, really?
Right? Like, if anything, like, you should be defending the protesters, because they're the ones that are, in their eyes, fighting a tyrannical government force.
Well, they all secretly believed.
It's almost as like there's like some difference between the types of people that are protesting in Missouri and the types of people on the ranch in Nevada. I can't figure it out. And then one incident I found kind of funny. In June of 2019, the Oath Keepers got involved in a standoff between Oregon state legislators. Now, so what happened was...
Oh, I remember this.
Oh, you were living in Oregon.
I was there.
Back then, weren't you? Yeah. So what happened, and correct me if I'm wrong about the details, was the Oregon state legislature was about to vote on some kind of environmental protection bill, and 11 of the Republican senators left the state and went into hiding so that they couldn't vote on the bill. And the governor of Oregon ordered state police to bring these senators back so that they could vote on the bill, and the Oath Keepers intervened, trying to protect the Republicans, threatening the governor with civil war. And the threats got so bad that the state capitol was even closed for a day.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually more detail than I remember, to be honest. My level of concern was just a bunch of crazy motherfuckers have shut down this government building.
Yeah.
That's Oregon for you. Like, that's as far as I got,
Yeah, I mean, like, you have a lot. Oregon is a crazy state.
It is, dude. It's
you have like
weird.
it's just like the far right and the far left, both violent, both deranged in their own ways, and like nobody in between.
No, not at all.
It's so fucking funny.
It's sometimes in the same like 10 square blocks.
Yeah. It's like how does a society polarize itself like that? It's so weird. And again, this is a small sample of the type of shit that the Oath Keepers would do, but like basically whenever there was like a standoff between like some renegade like miner or rancher who had a lawsuit against the federal government, they like showed up on the property and be like, "We're the Oath Keepers. We're gonna, shoot you down if you set foot on this property."
If you make your entire little club about protecting people from a tyrannical government, and then the government never does any of that shit, you gotta find side hobbies. You gotta...
Yeah, exactly. So this is this is basically what they do. These are like just a bunch of guys like LARPing this fantasy of civil war and, practicing these like paramilitary drills like out in the forest, which, hey, I could see how that would be kind of fun.
Oh, it'd be fun as fuck.
But it's just usually these like just overweight motherfuckers who wouldn't stand a chance against like the fucking SEAL Team 6.
No, that's what I always want to tell these guys. I was like, do you know what our capabilities are? Like, they're going to hit you with like some satellite gun you don't even know exists. Like, if this actually went down, you would stand no fucking chance. I don't care how much you trained.
Absolutely. Just like kind of a side note about like Stuart Rhodes himself. I didn't have time to go into detail on this, but he is an incredibly creepy and by many accounts abusive man. A lot of his family members have come out in the years since he got arrested and talked about how he would just like go on these crazy tangents inside the house. Like he would yell at them.
This guy? No way.
No, I mean, as much as he sounds like a very reasonable, compassionate, loving father.
Old Eye Patch Elmer, who started the Oath Keepers, is angry, paranoid, and deranged.
No, like he would load a pistol, wave it around, and threaten to shoot himself, shoot his family if he didn't get his way on like just the most minor decision.
I wanted blueberries in these pancakes.
Like literally, like he moved his entire family out to this like really just obscure part of Montana where
that's
was, like,
what they all do.
Yeah, where there's like no internet access. They're a 2-hour drive from the nearest town, and they don't have a car. And he's like getting really rich off the Oath Keepers,
right,
by the way. So like, but he's keeping his family in poverty, cutting them off from the outside world. Like he's just an absolute piece of shit,
dude. It's a cult.
Yeah,
it's just get rid of the religion, but keep all the weird shit.
Yeah,
that's all it is.
No, really, like just like I'm sure like even members of the Taliban have more dignity in some cases. And while the Oath Keepers had started out as a group ostensibly opposed to federal authority, that changed dramatically when Donald Trump became president. With a perceived ally in the White House, the focus of their ire shifted away from actual state power and toward the alleged deep state, which they believed was collaborating with Antifa and the New World Order globalists to take down Donald Trump.
Antifa's literally, that's my favorite of their boogeymen.
I know.
Has that group, does it actually exist? I've never seen evidence that it's even real.
I've had like Facebook friends that claim to be part of Antifa, but they're just like your usual fucking Madison guys that show up to a protest with a bandana on and like spray paint shit on the side of a Starbucks.
Does it not remind you of the Satanic Panic?
100%.
There's just always Antifa's around the corner. It's like, have they ever done anything you can prove was them?
It's the literal same fucking script. And like, there are people who wanted to like impose martial law to stop Antifa. So yeah, so the New World Order, they're very close to Trump and his allies. They provided personal security to Roger Stone in some instances. And then when Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, the Oath Keepers helped amplify the baseless claim that the election was stolen. Stuart Rhodes even called on Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act and declare martial law in order to prevent Joe Biden from taking office. He added that if Trump chose not to take such authoritarian measures, the Oath Keepers would be forced to do it themselves, causing, quote, a much more bloody war.
Okay.
I can't think of another example of a group that just did a complete 180 of its original mission statement. It's just like, imagine if PETA just like went on just like invaded the San Diego Zoo and started like stabbing every animal to death.
Well, I think it's they sat there with all this pent up energy again of waiting for the government to like take over, and they want to fuck someone up and they want to feel like they're defending something. And when it never happens, when the government never does it, at some point you just, all right, I'll do it for this guy.
Yeah. It's a total fucking Ouroboros where like they're so hyped up by the possibility of violence done against them that they end up doing violence.
We'll make some violence happen.
You know?
I've been training. I got blue balls for violence.
Yeah. So all this is to say that by the time Congress was set to certify the election results on January 6th, the Oath Keepers were more than prepared. In fact, as years' worth of federal investigations and prosecutions have revealed, they were actively planning to start some shit from the get-go. And, here are just like some of the things that the Oath Keepers were doing in the run-up to January 6th. This is according to a book by then acting Capitol Police Intelligence Chief Julie Farnham. They were, quote, coordinating travel to Washington, D.C., organizing teams to acquire firearms and ammunition, recruiting members to participate in the conspiracy, organizing trainings and paramilitary combat tactics. They brought weapons and other equipment to staging areas outside of D.C. Like in particular, it was revealed that they had a Virginia hotel where they had stashed tens of thousands of dollars worth of weapons. And like they were chatting about the idea of like building some kind of barge and floating these weapons across the Potomac. Like I can't it's
LARP shit.
It's
dude.
Total
I don't know how else
LARP
to put
shit.
it.
I keep like using that term, but like there's no other way to describe what they're doing and
they
how they
have
think about it.
made up a military operation for themselves.
Like they're literally making it harder than it needs to be because they think it's more badass.
It would be pretty cool to like build a barge and like float them.
But Stuart, couldn't we just like drive over the bridge on the highway?
They're going to be expecting that. They're going to be expecting it.
So yeah, they brought paramilitary gear to Capitol grounds, and they, quote, used social media, messaging apps, and websites to communicate with co-conspirators. And one detail that I find like particularly just revealing as just how dumb all of this is again, like Stewart was spending tens of thousands on weapons for this thing for January 6th. Like he thought that this was going to be like the Battle of Bunker Hill in his mind. And one of the things he spent money on was he bought $7,000 worth of night vision goggles.
Like it's like Step Brothers.
Yeah.
Like it's that stupid.
Like what the fuck what are you gonna eat the whole thing happened during the day. Like
I just think they're cool.
Like do you think you're just gonna be like fucking hiding in the bushes and like, Biden's gonna run down the street in a hoodie and you'll just like take him out? Like what are you doing? I just like it's so fucking ridiculous, man.
Do you think they gave each other code names?
They did. They totally
come in, Nighthawk.
No, they did like, and they were like, and they'd been doing this shit at like every time they like showed up at a ranch to like be part of some protest against the FBI or whatever, they would call it an operation. Like we're gonna have a new operation. We gotta fly to like Medford County, Oregon. Like,
they are all just John C. Reilly from Step Brothers in my head now. It's just a bunch of that guy.
It's you
want to float those guns across the river? Did we just become best friends?
So, in the weeks leading up to January 6th, Donald Trump and other Stop the Steal organizers enticed tens of thousands to show up in D.C. to protest the certification. Among these protesters, some 2,500 or so broke into the Capitol building itself. These rioters were led by just a handful of high-ranking Oath Keepers, along with other far-right militia groups such as the Proud Boys. And of course, let's not forget the one man who set the entire shit show into motion.
Now it is up to Congress to confront this egregious assault on our democracy. And after this, we're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. And we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
That speech that you just heard, made from the ellipse outside the White House, concluded at 1:10 p.m. By this point, leading Oath Keepers had already made the 30-minute walk to the Capitol, scouting the perimeter for weak spots and preparing to execute their battle plans. At this point, the MAGA foot soldiers, heeding the great king's demand, begin to march down to the Capitol as well. Out here, Jon Schaffer is among them, a patriotic paladin waiting to draw his sword against the wicked Setchian officers who guard the Capitol fortress. By 1:30 p.m., Patriots have surrounded the fortress. The Setchian guards retreat up the steps in terror as they are assaulted with bear mace and stolen bike racks. By 2:12, the first Patriots have breached the windows of the Capitol fortress. At 2:38, a column of Oathkeeper paladins, marching in stack formation, breach the rotunda and enter the fortress from the east. Meanwhile, on the opposite side, the Stormrider himself pushes himself to the front of the battle lines outside the Senate Parliamentarian's office. He too breaches the fortress, brandishing his bear mace and taunting the wicked Setchian guards. Okay, perhaps that account was a bit fanciful. But then again, this is the story of a man who, in his own mental sickness, began to conflate reality with fantasy, as did, clearly, so many others. So here is what we do know, based on details from Jon's recently concluded trial. Jon was never a high-ranking member of the Oath Keepers. He was technically a lifetime member, but all that really means is that he paid a one-time fee of about $1,200.
Yeah, I'm technically a member of the Satanic Church.
Yeah.
You just give them some money and they send you a piece of paper.
It's literally just that. And then, you have to remind yourself to unsubscribe from their emails for the rest of eternity.
I don't want to go to your punch bowl mixer.
Yeah. So, by all accounts, the Oath Keepers were using encrypted signal chats and shit like that to communicate with each other. On January 6th, they were telling each other where to go, how to navigate the building and all that shit. But Jon Schaffer wasn't privy to that shit.
Don't give Jon the codes. He's such a Dorcas. I don't want him in on this.
It's his last album was real shit. They've fallen off since Burnt Offerings. However, Jon definitely did break into the Capitol. According to court documents, he was one of the first 6 men to enter the building from the Senate Parliamentarian's office on the northwest side. Now, he wasn't one of the first guys in the building because it had already been breached at one or two other points by then, but at the specific part of the building where he broke in, he was one of the first guys in there. It's probably why that cameraman had such a nice shot of him. And Jon was indeed carrying bear mace, but unlike some other rioters, there's no evidence that he actually used it against police. According to his indictment, Jon was only inside the building for around 10 minutes. Now, how or why he left and what he did immediately afterward, we can only speculate.
Diarrhea hits at the worst times, man.
I was going to say maybe he went out for ice cream. He's just I really worked up an appetite here. Oh, look, there's a Haagen-Dazs.
Yeah, it is real LARP. He's all right, I had my fun.
Yeah.
I'm fireballed out. I'm going home.
Yeah. So, as we noted in part 1, the identification of Jon Schaffer as one of the Capitol rioters began almost right away. By January 7th, the FBI was already looking for him. The next day, Jon contacted a lawyer, and on January 17th, he officially turned himself into the FBI, where he was initially charged with 6 felonies.
I have to imagine that lawyer basically told him, because it only took 10 days to turn himself in.
Yeah.
He had to have told, that lawyer's just dude,
you're not getting out of this
you're
one.
fucked on that. I can't help you.
It's literally do this or try to live in Cuba for the next 30 years.
Breaking into the Capitol, that's a little out of my pay grade.
Yeah. So from the beginning, Jon cooperated with federal authorities. And in April, he became the first individual to plead guilty to participating in the Capitol riot. So, in the eyes of some, he's a snitch.
He is, in my eyes.
Pretty much by definition, right?
Yeah.
As part of his plea deal, his indictment was reduced to 2 charges, which were entering a restricted area and obstructing an official proceeding. He was let out of the Indiana jail cell where he had spent several uncomfortable months. According to Schaffer's lawyer, while in prison, Jon faced death threats from numerous inmates and had feces and urine thrown at him during his time in jail. Yeah, prison's a rough place.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't want to be there, even if you're a guy as tough looking as Jon Schaffer. Apparently, they had put him in what they call administrative segregation due to his celebrity status.
Celebrities, that's a bit of a stretch.
I think maybe the lawyer tried to exaggerate how big Iced Earth was. Like, what, you mean you've never heard of them? It's like they're basically like Metallica, bro. Now, in spite of the fact that he turned himself in, it took nearly 4 years for Jon to be sentenced for his crimes.
There's probably not a lot of administrative precedent for a crime like this.
There isn't, and part of the reason it took so long is because there were lawsuits that went all the way up to the Supreme Court about like just what is appropriate to charge someone for this event for.
Well, and it's weird too, because it's not like, I mean, it's a failed coup at the end of the day, but to the people that participated, there is an argument to be had. Did they know that that's what they were a part of? They're so fucking misled.
Yeah. I remain convinced that the overwhelming majority did not.
They didn't view it that way.
No, they didn't. Now, the Oath Keepers definitely fucking did, and the Proud Boys fucking did.
Yep.
And all it takes is just a handful of like really evil motherfuckers to like just motivate a mob to like do some horrible shit. But of the tens of thousands of people who showed up that day, like they did not go there thinking like we're gonna break years of precedent of democratic peaceful transfer of power norms.
And that's where it's a tough moral argument of if you throw the book at them or not.
Absolutely. And we'll get to that in just a second, I think. So finally, on October 24th, 2024, when Cal and I were in like month 6 of recording this podcast, part of this series, Jon Schaffer was sentenced to 3 years probation and 120 hours of community service. He will also have to pay a $1,000 restitution and a $200 financial assessment. All of this assuming that he is not pardoned by future President Trump.
I think he's too low level to pardon. On top of that, he's a snitch.
Maybe.
I think he already made his deal. He's not getting a pardon.
I don't like Jon Schaffer. He snitched on me. He said he was sorry. I never apologize. You should never have to apologize for anything. And what was with that fucking Spawn album? Why weren't there more hardcore guitar solos on that?
He named names. I don't know how you get out of something like this.
Yeah. And apparently he didn't have that many names to name, but because he was so cooperative, the feds went easy on him. And like by comparison, obviously Stuart Rhodes got 18 years, but the actor Jay Johnston, who was in Mr. Show and also Bob's Burgers, he was sentenced to a year in prison. So he must have done something like marginally worse.
Yeah,
in the context of that event. All in all, around 1,500 people have been charged with crimes related to January 6th, of which 900 have pled guilty and more than 180 individuals have been convicted at trial. And Cal, I think as we were hinting at, I believe this is a fair sentence. I don't think Jon should spend like years in prison.
No, I think they've done enough to scare him. Mm-hmm. And I think that's all you need.
Yeah, I agree with that. And same with the vast majority of people who I really just got caught up in the moment and did something really dumb and to a man are all brainwashed. But how much of that is their fault? How much of it is just the social forces that victimized them in a way?
Totally agree.
Now, by the time Jon turned himself into the FBI, the other members of Iced Earth had long since distanced themselves from his actions, and one by one, they left the group. Obviously nothing new to Iced Earth.
Right. This wouldn't even slow him down.
But of course, this led the media to report that Iced Earth had broken up. But frankly, I don't see it.
Can a one-man band break up?
No, I don't think they understood that, Jon's cycled through entire towns worth of musicians over the course of his career. So if he wants to go on tour with something calling itself Iced Earth, he'll find two ex-cons, like a middle schooler and a robot drummer to do that.
No, it's like 9 Inch Nails or something. You know?
Exactly.
No one even cares about the names of the rest of the group most of the time.
Yeah. Iced Earth is Jon Schaffer.
Matt Barlow is the only one I can name of all his revolving door musicians.
Pretty much. Now, to bolster my point, it so happens that even Jon's legal woes couldn't prevent the release of new material under the Iced Earth banner. In January of 2022, 1 year after the Capitol riot, Jon released a brand new collection of what can only loosely be called music. It is titled A Narrative Soundscape.
It's somehow worse than what that sounds like.
So we'll play a little bit of this in a second, but this CD was originally meant to accompany a book that Jon Schaffer was putting out called Wicked Words and Epic Tales. Like, basically, it's a coffee table book, which is a collection of Iced Earth lyrics along with a bunch of like fan artwork, essentially. And the artwork is like kind of cool, like if you're into that sort of thing. But
you would have to be a super fan to pick that up.
Yes.
But
no, this is for the really hardcore Iced Earth fans. Because again, like Iced Earth music is pretty cool, but the lyrics are it's not like fucking Robert Frost.
No. I would say they're one of the weaker aspects of the group.
Yeah. And so, to kind of pay homage to his own lyrical prowess, he had this CD, which consists of 15 tracks that are all classic Iced Earth songs reimagined as spoken word poems with musical accompaniment. Again, I'm going to go back to that song Dystopia that we played in our last episode. Try to remember what that song sounds like, and now you're going to hear what that same song sounds like on A Narrative Soundscape.
Enter the nightmare this future does implore. A techno city-state, a prison, nothing more. Rounded up like cattle, you're forced into the trains. Nothing that you've ever known will bring you so much pain. If you try to resist me, you'll find me inhumane. But if you just submit, you'll live your life a slave.
Again, try to imagine listening to like 75 minutes of that.
You know, and weirdly enough, Nick played one of the better cuts. like it's at least with Dystopia, it's like it could be like a 6-minute movie trailer that just keeps going.
Yeah.
But like when it's applied to songs like Wolf or anything off the Spawn one, it's even sillier. You're just sitting there going like, what the fuck am I hearing?
It's like, it like makes you like reconsider like whether or not Iced Earth is good at all. Like it's like just the opposite of whatever he intended for this album. And it's like every like quote unquote soundscape. It reminds me of like the home screen from like a PC Diablo game.
Yeah, no, I know. This is like the shit that comes with Fruity Loops Pro.
Yeah. Like, oh my God. Can you imagine, Cal, if like this approach was applied to like almost like any other song that we've covered on Polishing Turds?
I was gonna say, you could do this to fucking Bob Dylan and it would be annoying. Like I don't care how good
it feel. How does it feel to be on your own?
You could take the best lyrics that exist, whatever artist that is to you, and if you did this to it, you would hate it by the end.
Who let the dogs out? Who? I'd literally challenge anyone to listen to that whole thing in one sitting and not pull your fucking hair out. Now, before we wrap this up, I want to share with you a statement that Jon Schaffer released a few weeks ago after he was formally sentenced. Now, I know this episode is already way too long, but I think at this point we at least owe it to Jon to hear him out. So here is a slightly abridged version of his statement. Quote, "To my family, friends, and fans worldwide, I profoundly regret my actions on January 6, 2021. I haven't been a perfect man, but for the majority of my life, I've been a very productive man, and have tried to live my life with integrity and a disciplined work ethic. I deeply love our country and the founding principles that have inspired people from all over the world to look at the USA as a beacon of hope for all humanity. When the global pandemic came upon us and chaos ensued all around the US in 2020, I was very concerned about what seemed to be a collapse of our country and the rule of law. When the 2020 election took place and I saw many public officials and media outlets reporting that the election was stolen, my concern deepened. This led to my decision to go to DC and have my voice heard. I'm not excusing my impulsive behavior. I was wrong, and I take ownership of my actions. I own the fact that I made a huge mistake, and I wish I never would have gone there. In fact, the consequences have been devastating on my life, family, friends, business, colleagues, and business partners. I knew immediately that I let my emotions get the best of me and made a terrible mistake. I willingly surrendered and cooperated with authorities. I spent several months in custody following my self-surrender. I was placed in solitary confinement with horrendous conditions, which was an extremely traumatic experience. Until now, I have resisted the strong urge to issue a public statement due to my ongoing cooperation and the wishes of federal authorities. This extended period of silence has added additional challenges to my life as a public person. Since the beginning, I wanted to express my remorse for my actions and address the legitimate concerns of my fans worldwide. This whole situation has been extremely difficult. However, I know that I have become a better man because of it. I used to stay so busy that I didn't have much time for self-reflection. In the last 3.5 years, that's mostly what I have done. I have become a member of a wonderful church and improved myself spiritually, mentally, and physically. This personal revival has inspired me to continue writing and recording music. I'm certain there will be a very positive outlook in my future artistic creations. To my fans who have continued to support me throughout this deeply embarrassing ordeal, I want to apologize for letting you down and thank you for keeping me going. To those fans who I have lost due to my decisions that day, I certainly understand. I humbly ask everyone to allow me to demonstrate through my actions how far I've come. I wish to continue to use my art to unite people and never to divide. Sincerely, Jon Schaffer. What do you think?
That's about as good of an apology as you can give.
Yeah.
He didn't make excuses. He just admitted he fucked up and
now he's a church-going man, Cal. Maybe
that's my favorite line in the whole thing, because that is so deeply ironic.
It's just like everything fucking coming full circle, isn't it?
My dad was fucking right.
Yeah. I'd like to apologize to the teacher who shoved soap down my mouth back in middle school. Like, imagine if like the next Iced Earth album is like a Christian album. That happened to Typo Negative.
I would say don't put that on it because it'll happen.
Well, like Typo Negative, like their last album happened after Peter Steele like went through like a similar. He went to prison and like became a born again Christian, and they actually put out a really good album with Christian lyrics in it. Like it's strange, but they made it work.
No, there is good Christian albums, and we've talked about it before.
Yeah, and I've decided, guys, that is pretty much where I'm going to end this series on that note. Over the past 2 months, I went through several different drafts of this script, each with a wildly different ending based on what was happening in the election and what I thought people should think about it. But the truth is, none of us know what's going to happen going forward. It'll take years, perhaps even decades, for the meaning of everything we've talked about to become clear. Don't get me wrong, I still think that Donald Trump is bad. I still think that January 6th matters, that conspiracy thinking is toxic, and that this country is in serious danger of devolving into some form of fascism. And I do not use the term fascism lightly. But I also believe Jon Schaffer when he says that he's sorry. I'm sure he still believes a lot of the silly shit that, I disagree with, but if I met the man today, I doubt I'd be faced with the rabid maniac from that infamous photograph. I'd like to think that this man truly has healed and grown. And if he can do it, so can others who have been led astray. And by extension, so too can our democracy. There we go.
Yes. What am I supposed to add?
The most difficult series we've ever fucking done. Like, honestly, like the fucking 7-part ICP series was a breeze compared to what we had to go through to finish this fucking series.
Yes.
And
it's a good way to end the season.
I wanted to end it on a ray of hope, I guess, because this next year is going to be really fucked up. Like, there's going to be a lot of bad shit happen and a lot of negative consequences towards all sorts of things that are happening with our government. And it's going to breed new conspiracy movements and new wild actions. But I have a way of thinking that everything bounces back.
Yeah, we're old enough now to know life always keeps moving forward.
Yeah, like you all are going to be fine. You're going to keep chugging along. Cal and I are going to keep chugging along. And things will eventually get better because, as Billy Ray likes to point out, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. All right, before we leave this episode, I just want to give a shout out to some of our sources for this series, which I forgot to do in our last episode. So in our last episode, I drew heavily from a couple of books. One was a book by Nomi Prinz called All the President's Bankers. That's about like the financial history of the U.S. and in particular, like the true story of how Jekyll Island and the Federal Reserve got started. And then, of course, I would be remiss not to note the actual Creature from Jekyll Island book, by G. Edward Griffin. Don't read it.
Do we have to give credit to fiction?
Yeah, I suppose so, And then for this episode, I read the books Alt America by David Newart. Great book. I would recommend this one to you, Cal. Like Alt America, it's a history of the radical right and how it went from like just guys in militias out in the woods to 4chan to Trump, like just drawing a straight line through all that shit. I also read the book Domestic Darkness by Julie Farnham. She was a Capitol Police Intelligence officer who gave her inside account of what happened in January 6th. I also read The Perils of Extremism by Jason Van Tattenhove, who was a member of the Oath Keepers and later defected. And then also one of the best podcast episodes I have ever listened to. It's called The Secret History of the Oath Keepers, which is on a podcast called The Farm Mach 2. Weird podcast name, but they're actually really good. Very like, if you want something like more like academic than everything we talked about, listen to that podcast featuring a guy named James Scaminacci III, who was a source for a lot of the stuff that I talked about in this episode. All right. Other than that, thank you for listening to all of this. If you went through this entire series, you truly are a super fan. So I probably don't have to tell you to give us a 5-star rating on social media, but definitely do so. Follow us on polishing.podcast on Instagram /threads. If you want to email us, polishingturdspodcast@gmail.com. But otherwise, just stay safe, but also stay free.
Yeah.
Those two concepts are not diametrically opposed. Anything else, Cal?
Stay tuned for a nice, light Christmas episode.
Yeah, we got
We'll
some
sneak one more in this year.
For sure. All right. Rock over London. Rock on Madison. Fetch America's Rewards app.
I'm going to read you pages. I hope you don't get bored listening to it. Promise? Don't get bored listening to it. All those hundreds of thousands of people back there.